talk about right now is basically the cause of World War II, even though we're talking about World War I. Because what caused World War II? World War I. Yeah, World War I did. And especially the peace treaty that ended World War I really set up all of the stuff that's going to play out over the next 20 years and then eventually leads to the outbreak of World War II. Okay? So here's the first little bit that you need under where it says end of World War I. All right? So it says, remember in 1917, so 3 years after the initial conflict began, the United States enters the war and Russia drops out. All right? So it's like an allied power withdraws, but then another allied power adds themselves, so it kind of evens itself out in that way. Russia, we'll talk more specifically about what's going on in Russia tomorrow, but Russia is forced to drop out of the war because they have too many problems going on in their own nation and they can't focus on the war effort. They essentially are going to be the location of the very first communist revolution. And remember, when we talked about communism and we talked about Karl Marx, Marx predicts communism to take place after capitalism, right? He says that capitalism is doomed for failure and the thing that's going to happen afterward is a communist society. Russia is in a good example of a spot to have a communist revolution because they weren't capitalist yet, because they didn't industrialize yet. So when we talk about like, oh my gosh, communism's so bad, communism is got such a bad rap, because it's never played out the way that Karl Marx wrote about it. It never has happened in the way that he wrote and theoried about how it should go down. And so when we watch what goes down in Russia starting tomorrow, and you're like, this doesn't sound like what Marx had in mind, it's not. It's not what Marx had in mind. Okay? So, first things to note here, there's a couple words that you are going to have to be aware of. The first one is armistice. That is not the official end of the war. All that is an informal agreement to stop killing each other, to stop fighting. An armistice just means, okay, I'm not going to kill you guys anymore. But they need an official ending. And the official ending comes in with the peace treaty, all right? The peace treaty was signed at the Palace of Versailles and becomes known as the Treaty of Versailles due to the location of where they met. In the time it wasn't known as the Treaty of Versailles, the conference where they held the meetings for the peace talks was called as the Paris Peace Conference. What you should know up front about the Treaty of Versailles is that basically in Versailles you had a meeting of all of the leaders from the Allied countries, but no representatives from the Central Powers. So it would be like trying to negotiate peace without inviting your enemy to the peace talk. All right? It's like trying to come to a deal with somebody that you're in a disagreement about without ever conferring with that individual. So basically the Allied powers come together, try and negotiate terms for peace, and the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians are essentially left out to dry. All right, here's the next little bit that you have about the 14 points. Yeah. Yeah. Here you go. So Woodrow Wilson, again, U.S. president at the time, is going to be a part of the peace talks, despite the United States not entering the war until pretty much the last couple months there. And he's going to try and negotiate the 14 points at the Treaty of Versailles. His 14 points are, again, a plan to create a long-lasting peace in Europe so another great war could never happen again. Ultimately, the 14 points were a failure because we know that 20 years later, there's another huge, massive war. So nice try, Woodrow Wilson. One of the 14 points, and the one that's the most significant, is the League of Nations, okay? The creation of the League of Nations, which is the 14th point on his list. The League of Nations essentially was supposed to be like an international peacekeeping group. Think of it as like the prototype to the United Nations, which we have today, right? The United Nations today has representatives from all of these globalized countries that they try and mitigate issues before an actual conflict comes to fruition and a war breaks out. The League of Nations is an international group that would have done the same thing in this time period. Interestingly enough, Woodrow Wilson didn't think that the United States should be a part of that League of Nations. And here is just a rundown of his 14 points. So these are the things that Wilson wanted to establish post-World War I and say these are the things that are going to maintain peace over the long term. All right, some of them seem super reasonable. End of secret treaties, that would basically get rid of alliances. Freedom of the seas, free trade, we like that stuff, that's capitalism stuff. Arms reduction, reduce the military. So some of this stuff is just like, okay, yeah, that sounds decent. And then you'll see number 14, League of Nations. This is that international peacekeeping body that's supposed to deal with conflicts amongst countries that are getting into it before they get into a war. All right, and there is a little bit about the Treaty of Versailles. If someone asks you on Jeopardy when you're 55 years old and they call you up and they say, what is the cause of World War II? Your answer is going to be, what is the Treaty of Versailles? Okay?
What's the cause of World War II?
Yes, it's the cause of World War II. Exactly. Reason being is because, again, this peace treaty is going to be negotiated by the Allied powers without any reference or negotiation with the losing side. And by the losing side, I mean the Central Powers. Okay? So Germany and the German allies were not even present when this was being drawn up. And each of the allied countries' representatives are all trying to negotiate the peace that's going to ultimately benefit their own individual nation. So France, their goals out of the Treaty of Versailles, they're seeking revenge against the Germans, and they want to weaken Germany. Great Britain, they're looking for reparations. That's money for the stuff that got ruined during the war, all the stuff that got bombed out and all that other stuff. And they want to restore a balance of power. They want to make it so Germany isn't so powerful anymore. And then the United States, they want to claim peace in the world without declaring a victor of the Great War, and they want the 14 points, including the League of Nations. So some pictures for you all, some side-by-sides. If you look on the left, that is an image of the Western Front. You can see the trench lines dug into the earth there. And then you can see again on the right side, same image of the same landscape, except you can see how the earth has grown over these trench lines, and you can still see how it's apparent there. This is in Belgium, just as a frame of reference. This is a then and now with the beaches at Gallipoli, which is in Turkey, or what was the Ottoman Empire at the time, at the beginning. And you can see that it's an amphibious assault, amphibious like amphibian, like they came in from the water and they unloaded on the beaches. It was a huge, huge, huge battle. But now it looks like a kind of like a resort style beach and you just go there for vacation. And the reason I put these on here is just because I think it's so easy to get caught up in like thinking about history as this like ancient dead thing. But like when you see it side by side like that and you see it mashed together, it's kind of hard to ignore the fact of all the people that were there and all the people that lost their lives and just how significant it is. This one is just the impact of a shell that you can see impacted the earth in this huge crater in the earth, and they maintained it. And to give you guys a sense of relative size, if you look in the corner, you can see like the little houses, little buildings. You can imagine like how many of those little buildings you would be able to put in the big impact of the earth there. And just a couple outcomes of the treaty. This is not on your stuff, but if you feel inclined to add because you think it's good stuff, I wouldn't blame you. I think it's good stuff too. Remember, the Treaty of Versailles starts World War II, and the reason why is it completely screws Germany over, and then Germany feels like they got something to prove, which they totally do in World War II. Yeah.
Is this going to be on the quiz or the test?
The test? No, but it's still good to know.
Okay.
So here's what you need to know about the treaty's outcomes. The treaty completely blames Germany for the whole war. Remember, it takes two to tango, or in this case, in the World War, it takes a lot of countries to tango. So when Germany gets all the blame, that's going to tick them right off and say, we weren't the only ones fighting and dying. In addition, all of these are different restrictions that are put on Germany after the treaty. So Germany is not allowed to build or buy submarines anymore. They aren't allowed to have an air force anymore. They are not allowed to build or import weapons or any other war materials anymore. And they have to shrink their army down. So basically, all of these demands are trying to weaken the militarism aspect in Germany. And what this really does is incite nationalism in Germany, because it says, these allied powers think that they can tell us how to run our stuff, and we didn't even sign that peace treaty. Why are we going to abide by something we didn't sign or negotiate? And then wider effects, talking about other places other than Germany for a second. You see that all of the large land empires of the 17th and 1800s, so Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire especially, are going to lose their land. It's going to break up into smaller countries. A lot of the colonies that were controlled during the age of imperialism are going to be relinquished by the losers, and new countries are going to be created, and Russia's going to force to cede some land as well. So just to give you guys an idea, this is pre-World War I. Here's Europe, and you can see this huge swath in the center. This tan swath is Austria-Hungary, right, all in here. The gunpowder, okay, right, right. So after World War I, is like this. So you can see all the different countries up there that are labeled. So it goes pre, post, pre, post, pre, post. Yeah, what's up?
So how come Russia lost land? Because I thought they were on the side with like U.S. and all of them.
Remember they dropped out in 1917 because they had so much internal strife going on, and all of this going on over in Eastern Europe becomes they cannot fight for it because they're facing a civil war.
Yeah.
Once the Bolshevik Revolution kicks off in 1917, for 3 years it's all out war in Russia. It's a civil war between the Red Army and the White Army. And we'll talk about it tomorrow, but basically it forces them to divert their attention from all the stuff that's happening over here. They can't claim those lands because they're too busy doing other stuff.
I mean, like they dropped out and like they helped them. So like, why would you take land from a country that helps you?
It's not so much about them taking the land away from them, like the Allied powers, as it is about those different nationalities and ethnic groups claiming their own self-sovereignty. Remember, Woodrow Wilson's big thing is that nations small and great should be able to participate in a world that's safe for democracy, and some of these smaller countries are going to want to establish themselves as independent from these massive land empires and establish themselves as sovereign and democratic nations. That's the idea. Any other questions on the stuff? It's a lot of stuff.
So was that the outcome of the civil war within Russia?
The outcome of the civil war in Russia is that the Communist Party takes over. But we'll talk about it. Talk about it tomorrow. All right, so the last thing I want to say, you don't necessarily need to write all of this, but just again to kind of get you guys thinking about how this is going to feed into what we talk about next week with World War II. The Treaty of Versailles is known as a bad peace treaty because it doesn't keep peace. All right, it only stands for like 20 years, and what it really does is makes the Germans really, really mad, and then they feel like they have to do something about it, and then they do. So if the Treaty of Versailles is going to make resentment, it's going to make the German people feel bitter, and essentially it's going to become a cause of conflict, and this is going to be one of the biggest things that ticks off Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is a German soldier in World War I, and when he loses this fight, he's got something to prove now. He's got a chip on his shoulder because Germany just got completely screwed over by the terms of peace. So this is all going to definitely tie in to what we